Howdy, Bo. Good evening. Welcome to Spiritual Warriorship, where we hear from, discuss books by His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. And we have been through many of his books, and he has many we haven't yet. We've been in touch with the Spiritual Warrior books. And we're presently in Spiritual Warrior 4, subtitled Conquering the Enemies of the Mind. I don't know how many of you have been with us for a while, but when we've been through this book, we've covered quite a few chapters. If I saw you were sitting in the same room, I'd give you a quiz. But we looked at chapters entitled Avoiding Excessive Anxiety. Don't know if you remember that and you got anything from that, or if you make notes, then maybe you can go back and check. We looked at choosing love over fear, remember? Because we looked at different types of fear. And also, we did managing anger, remember? We had many exercises to make us mindful and alert of anger. What brings it up, what sets it off. And we looked at shoulds and blamers quite a bit. And we also, part of that chapter had to do with healthy anger. And then we went through chapter 5, which was coping with depression. And those are the different types of depressions, what causes it. So we've been getting quite a bit. And this chapter 6 is entitled Addiction and the Process of Recovery. And we're near the end, closure of this chapter. But what he's doing here is increasing our awareness of what some call spiritual emergency. He had quite a section on spiritual emergency or spiritual crisis that many choose sometimes to label as nothing more than a mental disorder. But it's when there's a shift in the consciousness or transition of consciousness. And it can be caused, as he's told us, by a number of things, and sometimes happen in different situations. And an example he gives is in yoga practices, something called the Kundalini experience, where people get energy in the spine, and they have a practice of raising it up. And sometimes these energies move upward on the spine and can really bring about a transition of consciousness that people aren't quite prepared for. That's the only thing about some of these things. He also told us that certain people have the ability to develop a higher consciousness or develop entirely different perceptions. But in many cases, they cannot properly understand and identify these feelings. Again, they may be in some group or study group or healing group or something, and there's not a proper management of the energy or observation in these people. They really don't know what's causing them. So sometimes this transition in energy can change the consciousness to such a degree that the behavior, people are put in mental institutions, and when they're actually undergoing a spiritual crisis. So we looked at that, and then he delved into addiction and the 12 steps, because he tells us that addiction is quite serious, and an effective treatment is very profound when properly administered. And he's chosen the Alcoholics Anonymous in its empowering program with their process called the 12 Steps. And the program contains many tenets that can allow people to gain a tremendous shift in consciousness and help them accelerate in their understanding of the self. So he dealt with that, and it helped. I hope you heard. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Bhuvan Mahan had typed out those 12 steps, and if you have written them down and you are on the spiritual path, you can see how it can help you even in your spiritual growth. I got quite a few realizations myself while we went through that. So these 12 steps show stages that an addict must go through for recovery. And of course the main emphasis, I'd say, is on that the individual takes shelter of a higher power. So we looked at that. And then he compares aspiring spiritualists to a recovering addict due to the many attachments and temptations that continue to enslave the individual. And if you really think about it, we're all addicts, because there's some things that we're attached to and we know we need to let go and we just don't. So tonight, we also went through, he shared with us one of his meditations entitled One Day at a Time. But right now, we want to look at his last section in this book where he talks about intoxication and ecstasy. Because usually the addict, why they are get addicted, is that they're looking for some satisfaction. And they're not satisfied with the mundane life or the suffering they're going through. And they look for some quick fix. And usually it's something they'll become addicted to, and they're not really, when they're up, it's okay, and when they're down, they're back and they're suffering. So he talks about spiritual intoxication and ecstasy. As I've said many times, if you've been hearing and following us, one thing he does, excuse me, he puts right in your face what the problem is, or whatever the situation is that we may be facing. So there's no way of saying, oh, I didn't know that, or that's not me, or he puts it so clearly. But once he puts it in your face, you can acknowledge, yes, that's me. Yes, I do that, or I've done that, or I feel that way, or he then gives you something to take you to a higher level. Because that's why we're here, to get to know self better and who we really are, who God is, and our relationship with Him. And He helps us with that. I hope you've been hearing that and picking that up as we've gone through these many books and subjects that He's given us. So now he's gone through the addicts, addiction and recovery. He's now telling us that intoxication is natural, and it's an ongoing aspect of the soul. The soul is Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha, or eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. The soul, in its pure state, has overwhelming, intoxicating experiences. And because we somewhat inwardly know of this sublime intoxication, many take shelter of artificial stimulants in order to try to acquire that experience. Furthermore, since more and more people feel blown out by day-to-day existence and feel unsatisfied, they will want a quick mind shift. Now, as a result, what do? They take shelter of all these different types of artificial stimulants. As the chaos in the world increases and continues to bombard us on all sides, people will take shelter of many artificial supports and even begin to fall apart. We see that almost every day now. As the demons try to gain control and narcotize human civilization, they will simply draw in many people who do not know the effects that addiction has on their physical bodies or even their subtle body, and who do not realize how much it interferes with their spiritual evolution. And sometimes people doing that aren't even interested in spiritual evolution, but what he's telling us, that it's a natural and ongoing aspect of the soul, and we're all spirit souls. So it's there, he tells us, somewhat inwardly we know of this sublime intoxication. So it will even predispose them to the influence of ghosts and other subtle entities. People should not feel comfortable with any type of intoxication, even socially, because it has a tremendous effect on the subtle body, and it invites so many negative influences to penetrate. And anybody who may be thinking about it or have tried something, after hearing this, because he spells things out so clearly, and if we're interested in our spiritual life, we will want to reach for the higher. He tells us that it's very, very important for us to, as aspiring spiritualists, to constantly try to help others in their process of spiritual growth, rather than just trying to protect and save ourselves. But we must, as he's showing us, protect ourselves to the degree that we correct addictive habits and overcome the depression we had talked about in the last chapter, and even manage anger that we, in the earlier chapters, we looked at, and overcoming extensive anxiety. You see, that's why this book is really important, conquering these enemies of the mind. So he tells us, by understanding some of this information, we might find ways to help a person through a spiritual crisis resulting from a certain higher energies that they do not know how to process. Recognizing spiritual energies can also help us as we begin to acquire higher visions and have contact with higher realms, because it will help us to understand the seemingly insane mood. I think last time I shared with you on my path coming close in some of these types of experiences, and I guess I was truly protected, that I didn't end up in a mental institution. I had some sense that something was going on beyond my understanding, but somehow I was able to be grounded or come back to a stable situation. Because I think I mentioned that Kundalini. It wasn't Kundalini yoga. It was what was that? Starts with a K. Huh? Do you remember that yoga? Kriya yoga, and it was a certain type of breathing and all. And I think I mentioned it. I found myself doing this exercise, and one time I was in a space that I was not happy in, and somehow was able to bring myself back. And at that moment, I decided I was not going to work with that anymore. So it's really, I'm thankful for whatever protection I had and sensibility. But there were a number of times. One time I went to was a retreat, and I had a sweat lodge, and you go in and you sweat and it's deep. And it does make a difference in your consciousness. And I started laughing. Oh, I was hysterical. I couldn't stop laughing. And I forgot how they were patting me on the back and trying to calm me down. But I was like in a whole nother realm of space. And thankfully, somehow I came back. So when he's mentioning some of these things, he knows what he's talking about. And we need to be mindful in here so that if we happen to get caught in a situation like that or something, some of those things begin to happen, we can remember these things are important and know how to check or ask for help. So he says to us, recognizing spiritual emergencies can also help us as we begin to acquire higher visions and have contact with higher realms, because it will help us understand this seemingly insane mood. Now, if a neophyte has a chance to associate with a higher spiritual being or a carrier of high spiritual energy, some of that energy will spill over onto them. Sometimes the neophyte may even temporarily experience very sublime ecstasies due to the potency of the carrier of such ecstasies. Just as a virus affects people who contact the infected environment, the association of such advanced personality will deeply affect the consciousness. Spiritual entities from very high abodes actually tone themselves down when they enter this particular plane. If they did not tone down their behavior, they would simply seem to be madmen due to their intense, intoxicated love. When certain catalysts stimulate the bliss that they normally experience, their physical body would not be able to contain such spiritual emotions. At times, when such people do experience intense spiritual ecstasies, it may eternally compare to an epileptic fit because they just cannot contain that energy and consciousness inside the body. Since the physical body cannot cope, the emotions sometimes cause tears to shoot out of the eyes, create heart palpitations, or even cause them to lose consciousness. These symptoms of deep ecstasy may in fact appear like a state of insanity or mundane intoxication. He tells us, the author, we are all crazy in one sense. To be in this material world, trying to function here. We are either insanely running after material gratification, or we are insanely trying to experience the spiritual ecstasy. We need to ask, what constitutes normalcy? Actually, no material culture in the world has any real standard of what constitutes normalcy. Normality.
Normalcy.
Hmm?
Normalcy.
Normality. Yeah, I had it kind of twisted there. It varies according to time and place. Therefore, whatever standards people impose as socially acceptable and normal all depends on relative considerations such as time and circumstances. Everyone has some type of insanity, but those people who are attached to material will experience great bewilderment because the temporary material world can never fully satisfy us. The temporary material world can never satisfy us. Consequently, people seek the shelter of addictions and stimulations, often with good intentions, because they just want the ecstasies and the mind shift. However, even a good intention can lead to degradation rather than acceleration. And I want us to go back to this meditation, a section of it that may help. Remember, he's talking to the Lord and asking the question of what's the difference between him as a spiritualist and an addict. Okay. He made a comment that even a person on the spiritual path still has addictions in the background of the consciousness. If the aspiring spiritualist is not careful, certain moods and situations will cause him or her to backslide once again and take shelter of past addictions. Of course, one thing with this philosophy, I feel that we're given so many steps to reach that higher sense of consciousness, and if we practice what we're given, the 4 regs and getting up in the morning, chanting the holy name, devotional service to the Lord, we can avoid backsliding. So in his meditation, this is like the end, he's talking, dear Lord, it was your great message carried by your dedicated messengers that ultimately cleansed my heart and pulled me out of the gutter. But how will I be able to avoid going back into a gutter mentality that could eventually degrade me into a gutter existence once again. It was then that I heard the voice of my sweet Lord's servant chuckle tenderly and non-judgmentally at my awkward predicament. The voice was female and full of loving emotion. And he tells us that Krishna, or God, has many agents and servants who especially look for those who are trying to make a major shift in their consciousness. These helpers are accessible. And maybe you yourselves out there can remember seeking help or crying out to God or Krishna, and somebody came and gave you a book, or you got a phone call and somebody told you about a program they'd like you to come at the temple or nearby, or a preaching center or a namahat, and you'd go and you'd hear something that gave you relief. I know when I first started going to the Institute for Applied Spiritual Technology with Bhakti Tirtha Swami and his lectures, and sometimes I would just hear and tears would just roll down. And the only thing I could say is my soul was hearing what it wanted to hear, needed to hear. And that's how it was expressing. And that's what he's telling us earlier, that the soul is like, that's the natural part of its being. So he tells us that these helpers are accessible to us. And this is what he heard. My cherished beloved, she said, just like your friend, the recovering alcoholic, you must learn to take things one day at a time. And even if you're not a recovering alcoholic, whatever your work is or your day activities are, one day at a time. If we jump too far ahead, it can get very confusing. Temptations are there, but just as you have overcome them so many times in the past to get this far, you must continue warding off these demonic desires to achieve complete mastery of your spiritual technology. Now, my child, the melodious voice continued, maintain and persevere. In fact, enjoy your success rather than lamenting your challenges. Enjoy your success rather than lamenting your challenges. You have applied for an advanced degree. Of course there will be demanding tests that you will have to pass. However, my precious one, you can rest assured that if you keep sincerely endeavoring to maintain your material sobriety, you will very soon be invited by our Divine Master to thoroughly enjoy spiritual intoxication. Unfortunately for you, you are not yet thirsty enough for this position. So, there have been delays in your ascension. I like that. You are not yet thirsty enough for this position. And we've heard many times in our Krishna conscious studies or reading Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita or hearing a teacher in order to advance or to understand. You need to be greedy for wanting Krishna consciousness, for wanting to reach the ultimate goal, which is, of course, love of God. And here, he's being told, you are not yet thirsty enough for this position. So there have been some delays. But I have confidence that soon you will be very thirsty and eager for this attainment. So for your spiritual life, you need to be thirsty, greedy, desiring for spiritual advancement, for spiritual awakening, for truly understanding. Until that time, though, just remain firm and fixed in your new lifestyle and go more deeply into your realizations. Do not waste even a moment on extraneous activities. Be very attentive and avoid all associations that in any way may weaken your resolve. And know for sure that we're guiding you. We are all indescribably intoxicated on love of God. But we will be even more blissful when you come and join the eternal party with us and all your liberated loved ones. Always remember that we love you dearly and that there is no shame in wanting intoxication. Just never settle for imitation intoxication of material dimension. Instead, always hanker to partake of the real sweetness of spiritual inebriation by embracing the actual altered state that exists in pure love of God. This can and will come effortlessly, but only when you unhesitatingly love and serve your Supreme Master and dance wildly for his pleasure. And those of us who know Bhakti Tirtha Swami know that he danced wildly for the pleasure of the Lord. So that's the conclusion of this chapter, Addiction and the Process of Recovery. And I hope there have been some points and concepts here to help us. I like this, the last part, when he says that intoxication is natural and is an ongoing aspect of the soul. And with this meditation, he's showing us that it's available to us at the higher level of knowing who we are, and that the Lord protects us and will help us in that vein. He says the soul in its pure state has overwhelmingly intoxicating experiences because we somewhat inwardly know this sublime intoxication, and many take shelter of artificial because they want a quick fix rather than continuing with that type of spiritual. And it's interesting, it can come from what we've taught, what our main pursuit is if we're doing this chanting. I think I told you yes. Is someone a question? Who's there?
There's someone named Messenger, Carol, David, Bhuvan Mohan, and Shruti.
Oh, Bhuvan Mahan's there. Ah, welcome, Shruti and David. I welcome all of you. There's a question?
Looks
A
like
statement,
there's
a comment?
a few comments. Carol says, when I met my spiritual master, I had been riding buses and crying for 3 days. Then, not knowing anyone was at the temple, I ended up walking into the temple room. A man was speaking and answered the same question I had been crying about. He answered with loving answer. And then Bhuvan Mohan says, when I was confronted on one occasion by numerous obstacles that militated against my attending an important Samskar festival like Gita Nagari, Gurudev came up behind me, placing both his hands on my shoulders, and I'll never forget his words to me at that time. You've made it. Smile. And I saw his smile, an evolved state to which I knew then I must always aspire.
And persevere and keep on keeping on, as we say. Wonderful, wonderful.
And then Messenger asks, who is the Supreme Spiritual Master?
Who do you think, Messenger, is the Supreme Spiritual Master? What comes to your mind? You say? This can and will come effortlessly. We're talking about love of God. Huh?
He says Krishna.
Okay, he said that? Okay. So you answered your own question. When you unhesitatingly love and serve our Supreme Master and dance wildly for His pleasure. Because if we're studying this teaching, this philosophy, if we're reading Srila Prabhupada's books, if we're hearing about devotional service, there's only one Supreme Master. And it's all about serving Him, and trying to reach the ultimate goal of love of God, love of Him. And it comes because if we're practicing, we must practice, we must go through the test that we're told. Haribo, yes.
And David says, this is a good and beautiful class.
David, bless your heart, David. I'm glad you. What do you find beautiful about it, David? One thing.
Everything.
Everything. Oh, bless your heart. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay. I've got some good news. Harinam Press, the publishers of these books of Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and you know I stopped opening with buy you get yourself a copy if you don't have. They've sent out notice that e-books are now available. You go to harinampress.org and you can order an e-book the book that you want in ebook format using a PDF format. And guess what? You can download it and it's yours on your computer for $4.95. Whereas the hard copy that has to pay shipping and mailing and handling is $14.95 plus. So I'm feeling those of you who do not have yet any of the Spiritual Warriors series, you can now get it digitally for $4.95, and I hope you will, because my reading, it stimulates me, and based on David's comment, because all I'm doing is bringing to you what Bhakti Tirtha Swami is, it can be beautiful and hopeful that you can help yourself and help others. So you're able to do that. And then the other announcement, last week when my technician was here and we closed the program, and he said to me, wow, this is program 99. And it was like, oh my gosh. Next week will be program 100, which I believe that's what it is on the board. But what that got me to thinking, and I came to a decision that as of this 100th program, I'm going to go on sabbatical for a while. I don't know exactly when, but at first I'm saying, how can I not, with the mind, will play with you. But I realized on Krishna.com, TV, you go to Krishna.com, audio, video, and click on TV, and under that, Spiritual Warrior. And my dear, there will be 100 programs starting from Spiritual Warrior 2. I think I started with Spiritual Warrior 3. But you can hear and see if you've been practicing, seeing if your life has changed, seeing how it has changed, because you wouldn't be coming each time just to be there. And I haven't been doing this just to entertain you. I've been coming from my spiritual master, and hopefully from his heart to my heart to your heart, and giving you concepts and ideas to practice to become strong spiritual warriors on this battlefield out there. So I guess we could say that tonight's my last live night, but you can still reach me by email if you care to. You can reach me at Mother Indrani 108 at gmail.com, and keep me in your prayers. What I have a project pending that I'm hoping to put more time in. For over a year now, I've been encouraged and trying to, in quotes, write a book. I have a box of journals from 1977, 80, and up to my meeting Bhakti Tirtha Swami and hearing about Krishna. And folks are saying that I need to get share that with others. So I want to try and discipline myself into taking the time to make the effort to see if that's what the Lord wants. I've been praying, asking the Lord, if it is your will that a book comes out of this material and out of me, thy will be done. But I realize I need time and more discipline, and so I'm going to be working on a project. But as I said, I know you all can continue with these studies, and now that you can get an ebook for $4.95, you'll be reading like crazy, hopefully. And I will see, because my whole thing of doing this is to please my spiritual master and to offer something to all those who are willing to hear. And I feel continually I'll be able to do that. Is there some comment?
Mm-hmm. Messenger says, the most important desire in my life is to experience the joy of God. Everything else is just a distraction. And Bhuvan Mohan agrees. And he also, Messenger also says, you keep speaking about spiritual intoxication, and if I experienced this to a greater extent, my desire for worldly desires would have to pale by comparison. And then Bhuvan, Mohan, and Carol are just reflecting on when they started listening to your classes.
Really? Been a while, almost 3 years.
And they seem to be excited about your venture to write this book.
And Messenger, let me share something with you. I hear, keep that desire, keep it strong, because the Lord is in your heart, everybody's heart, and He appreciates the desire of wanting to please Him, serve Him. And all I can say to all of you, please chant and endeavor to improve your chanting. Hear the holy name, because that joy you want is there. As you call on Him, He reciprocates and you can feel it. The intoxication will come. I found it when I went on that retreat, the last retreat I went on in October, and we chanted 64 rounds for 4 days out of 9 days. And I think, I don't know if I remember, I shared with you, by that 4th day of 64 rounds, being quiet, chanting and hearing the holy name, a feeling came over me, and you mentioned joy, the only thing I could say at the moment was, this is joy. And it's not something that hits you over the head, it's quite subtle. And as he was talking here about the body and how sometimes, tears come and this happens, and it happened to me. My body just couldn't take that joy that particular day. I almost went out, and they wanted to know if I wanted to go to the hospital. But my realization was, if you persevere and you call that name focused, fixed, the reciprocation of it is almost beyond what your body can take, but you can feel the joy of it. So keep that desire, Messenger, and everybody else, and work on it to become intoxicated with the love of God. Yes.
Carol has a few things to share. She says, my first note from your class how can we be intimidated when our source is divine? And Bhuvan Mohan says, yes, thank you, Mother Indrani. I started watching in October of 2008 before my collision. And David says, good love to you and thank you. Bhakti Carol says, I have 2 notebooks with notes.
Wow.
And she says, Messenger says, I am learning a lot from my Hare Krishna friends. Bhuvan Mohan Das has encouraged me to chant.
Good.
And he says, I know what you said is true.
Okay, keep up, do chant. And thank you all for your kind words. And Carol, check those notes and see if you're practicing some of the points, because Bhakti Tirtha Swami has given us many techniques, technologies to become spiritual warriors, Krishna conscious. Yeah.
Carol also says, I was just looking. The first class I attended here on Krishna.com with Mother Indrani was Thursday, December 18th, 2008. Thank you for 2 years, 5 months of classes.
Oh, Carol, you've been a while with us. Thank you for continuing. And keep studying, keep reading. Now you can get an ebook for $4.95. If there's any way you can do that. Any book that you want to go deeper in, do get them. And keep your chanting going, please. And follow the technology. And conquer the enemies of the mind. And make the mind your best friend. Spiritual Warrior 5, if you get to get that next.
Messenger says, thank you for encouraging me. And Bhuvan Maha says, thank you, Mother Indrani and everyone. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for being there, Bhuvan Mohan. Thank all of you for being there. And please stay in touch with me by email if you're so inclined. And Krishna bless you all. And may your spiritual life expand and expand joyfully and lovingly. Hare Krishna. Mm.